Thank you, friends. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening, and I know that we're going to have a good time together. I hope you're comfortable because we're going to cover a lot of time and a lot of territory tonight. I heard recently of 3 men who went pig hunting out back of Burke. There was a lawyer, a doctor, and a minister of religion. And as they went out with their latest rifles, up jumped this big boar and tore across in front of them, and all 3 lifted up their rifles, fired off at the same time, and bang, the poor old boar dropped over dead. When they got there to the carcass, they discovered that it was just one shot that killed the wild pig. So, of course, an argument broke out as to whose shot it was. Who was the cracked shot that hit the target? So after a great argument without any outcome, they decided to take the carcass back to town and let the vet examine it and decide which of them was the crack shot that actually hit the pig. So the vet was called in, and after careful examination, he said, there's no doubt whose shot hit the target and dropped the wild pig. And they said, well, come on, whose shot was it? And he said, it was definitely the minister's shot. And they said, what do you mean? He said, look, I've examined the carcass. I've looked at the shot, where the bullet entered. I know without any shadow of a doubt that it was the minister of religion whose shot hit the target. And so the lawyer and the doctor said, well, how do you know that? He said, the vet then said, well, the shot went in one ear and out the other. So it had to be the minister. Friends, tonight we are going to look at some interesting stuff together, some interesting information and material. And I'm hoping that it all just doesn't go in one ear and out the other. I'm hoping that you'll remember some of the information and the material that we are going to discover together this evening. Our program is entitled The King's or the Emperor's Dream. And together, and this is what I want you to remember about this evening's presentation. We are going to touch on one of the great needs of humanity, something that we all need, something that gives us a reason to do what we do, and that is hope. We all want hope. And so that's what I want you to remember from this evening's presentation. If you forget everything else, just remember the need for hope and where you can find the best hope possible. I was reading recently of a U.S. submarine, the USS S-4. It was out on maneuvers off the coast of Massachusetts, and after being submerged doing a dive for some time, as it surfaced, by accident, it struck a Coast Guard destroyer and it sunk the sub. And so there was a heroic effort to endeavor to save the survivors in that sub. And so they sent divers down, and they found that there were 6 survivors up in the top end of the sub in an air pocket. And so there was a desperate attempt to try to rescue those men. And the divers began to communicate with them. And as the survivors ran out of air, they tapped on the sub, on the body of the sub, and the submarine. And in Morse code, they sent a message. And the message was simply this: is there any hope? And you know, a lot of people around the world are asking that same question, not about the sub, but about this world of ours. When they look at the conditions of the world, people often ask, well, is it all going to end in some cataclysm? Or is there any hope? Is time running out for our planet? Or is there hope? Well, to answer that question, we're going to go back in time to 600 BC. back over 2,500 years, because the answer to that question is found in an ancient prophecy that predicted the history of the world's greatest empires and identifies the world's final empire. Now, you know, the history of our world is linked to the great empires of history. For example, we are all familiar with the ancient Egyptian empire. You know, friends, 4,500 years ago, the ancient Egyptians built the largest man-made monuments that this world has ever seen. And then there was the golden empire of Babylon, where they built great golden monuments and statues using tons and tons of gold. And then, of course, there was the great empire of Greece that really handed on to us much of our civilization, our values today. And then there was the great Roman Empire, probably the greatest and the most powerful empire that this world has ever seen. And then as we travel to the east, we find the great Mongol Empire that probably covered more territory than any other empire in the history of planet Earth. And then as we travel across to the Americas, we find the Incas and the Mayan civilizations. And then, of course, closer to home, we find the British Empire. You know, they say that during the reign of Queen Victoria, 1 out of every 5 people on our planet was ruled by the British Empire. And then right up to date, we have the Americans, who've influenced the world culturally, economically, and militarily. And now we find a new empire on the horizon, and all eyes are turning towards China. And there are a lot of people who expect China to become the next great superpower. And so down through history, our history as humans has been linked to these great empires. But this evening I want you to come back with me. We journey back through time to about 600 BC, to the time of the great king Nebuchadnezzar. He had a dream one evening, a very important dream that was interpreted by a young Jewish prince by the name of Belteshazzar. We know him today as Daniel. Now, Daniel interpreted this dream and provided us with one of the most amazing predictions or prophecies in the history of humankind. Now, as I mentioned, Daniel was a young Jewish prince who was captured in Jerusalem and taken to Babylon as a war hostage about 2,500 years ago. By a remarkable turn of events, Daniel the hostage became Daniel the prime minister of Babylon. An amazing transformation. Still more remarkable was his ability to predict the future. Never before has one single man seen so much of the future. He foretold many of the major events in history. His daring claims about the future have proved 100% accurate right down to our day. They are the most accurate and the most amazing predictions ever made. And then towards the end of his life, somewhere around 530 BC, Daniel wrote all this down. He wrote it all down. And the prediction or the prophecy that we are going to look at tonight, in this prophecy, he predicted 4 successive world empires that would rule. And what he predicted was fulfilled in every minute detail. They did. He even named 3 of the 4 empires. He named them. He gave them an identity. And in this prediction, as we will see, he predicted the political state of Europe today. Now, a copy of his prophecy, his book, his prediction, was found in the famous Dead Sea caves, and was one of the ancient scrolls that was found there, scrolls dating back to about the 2nd century BC. So we know that this book was written at the time that it claims to have been written. You see, friends, the predictions of the prophet Daniel are so amazingly accurate as he predicted the future that people have said, listen, nobody could predict the future like that. This guy has written somehow these prophecies after they happened. But we know now that all the evidence shows us that the book of Daniel was written when he claimed it was written back around 530 BC. We know that from the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, this ancient prophecy that we are going to look at together this evening predicted 2,500 years of history right down to our day. It started one evening in the great golden palace of Babylon, where the king, Nebuchadnezzar, had a dream. Now, he went to bed that night very troubled. Being the emperor, the king of a great empire, he was very, very concerned about the future of his family and his empire, wondering what the future held in store for this empire that he'd spent his life establishing. And it truly was, and is still today, considered one of the greatest empires this world has ever seen. The wealth of the then known world poured in to this empire, into the capital of this empire, the city of Babylon. And it was a city known for its gold. And so, of course, he was concerned about what the future held in store for this empire that he had built, that he'd established. And so, with a very concerned and troubled mind, he went to bed that night, worried about the future. Now, notice what the record says. Now, in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Now, back in those days, kings had wise men who advised them about how to conduct their affairs, how to run their business. And these wise men claimed to be in touch with the gods. They were wizards, magicians, astrologers, palm readers, Chaldeans, who claimed that they were in touch with the gods, and so when a dream came about, they could give an interpretation. Or if the king had to make a decision, they were able to get in touch with the gods and give him advice as to how the decision should be made. And so when the king woke up the next morning, he realized that he'd had a significant dream during the night. But to his absolute consternation, he couldn't remember what he'd dreamt. So, of course, there was a solution. Call in the wise men, the wizards and the magicians and the astrologers. Why call them in? Because they were in touch with the gods. And the gods would be able to bring the dream to memory. And so notice what happens. The king was greatly troubled when he woke up the next morning and couldn't remember his dream. So what does he do? He calls his wise men, magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to the royal palace. And notice what he says to them. He says to them, "Tell me what I dreamed last night and tell me of its significance." So he calls in the wizards, the sorcerers, the magicians, the astrologers. Tell me what I dreamed and tell me what it means. Now, some of you may have heard about the man recently who was walking up and down George Street continually snapping his fingers. up and down George Street, snapping his fingers. So finally, somebody stopped him and said, "What's this with snapping your fingers? I mean, you're walking up and down here, snapping your fingers all the time. Why are you snapping your fingers?" And he replied, "To keep the lions away." So he was reminded that there hadn't been any sightings of lions on the streets of Sydney for a long time, if ever. To which the man replied triumphantly, "Effective, isn't it?" You know, friends, Nebuchadnezzar thought he was onto a good thing here, snapping his fingers. But he was about to realize that it was not the way to find out about the future. And so he calls in the wise men and he asks them to tell him his dream and to tell him what it meant. Now, the wise men were in trouble. Because you see, this is what usually happened. The king would call them in. He'd say, "Look, I had a dream last night." And they would simply say, "Well, what was your dream, king?" He would tell them his dream, and they would just concoct any explanation that came to mind. So this was a great way to make a living. These wise men were amongst the most wealthy people in the empire because the king needed them to give him guidance. They were supposedly in touch with the gods. So whenever he called them in, he'd tell them the dream and they would concoct some sort of interpretation. But now it was different. Because this time, not only did he ask for the interpretation, but he asked them to tell him his dream, the dream itself. Now they were in trouble because, you see, they didn't know whether the king did remember his dream or not. So notice what happens. They come in and they say to the king, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream and we will interpret it." So it's business as usual. Tell us the dream, we'll give you a great interpretation. But notice what happens next. The king says, "Wait a minute. You tell me the dream, and then I will know that you can interpret it for me." So in other words, he says, you claim to be in touch with the gods, and if the gods can give you the interpretation for my dream, then surely they can give you the dream as well. Fair enough. Trouble for the wise men. Notice, they start whining, "Come on, king, there isn't a man alive who can tell others what they have dreamed. This is an impossible thing the king's required. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they are not here to help." So they have to make a confession. They have to tell the king that, "Look, we're not really in touch with the gods. We're wizards, magicians, astrologers, and all the rest of it. But we don't know the future. We don't really have the information that you're asking." Well, the king realizes that he's been hoodwinked all these years, and all this wealth has gone into these wise men who are not wise men at all. So being the man that he is, king of the empire, he becomes furious. And he says just two words: "Execute them. Execute them." The king decreed the death sentence for all the wise men. "I'm not wasting my money on you anymore. Put them to death." Now Daniel, the young Jewish prince, even though he wasn't there, because he was in training, he was considered one of the wise men. So you can imagine the shock he got when the king's guard and his leading soldiers come for Daniel as well, to put him to death with all the wise men. And at this, we are told, Daniel went to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. So he goes before the king and he says, "Please give me some time. If you can give me some time, I will find the answer to your request. I'll be able to tell you your dream and the interpretation." And then Daniel, notice, he returned to his house and he explained the matter to his friends. Now I want you to notice what they do. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And so Daniel prays to his God, the God of heaven. And the most amazing thing happened. Notice, during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. So while he slept, the king's dream was revealed to him. The king's dream and the interpretation. God himself, this God that he prayed to that night, heard the request, the petition of Daniel, the prayer of Daniel, and he responded. He answered his prayer. So the next morning, you can imagine, Daniel wakes up, he's got the information. He rushes down to the king's guard and he says, listen, don't execute the wise men of Babylon, hold on. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. Take me to the king. I've got the information. Do not execute the wise men. And so it is that Daniel is ushered in to the palace of the king. Ushered right into the royal chamber. Now, can you imagine the first question that the king asked Daniel? Hey, Daniel, you've had your time. As requested, can you tell me what my dream was and what it means? And then Daniel starts by saying, listen, king, no wise man, no astrologer, no magician or wizard can tell the king such things. They don't know the future. They're not really in touch with the gods. Well, I can imagine the king starting to get a bit hot under the collar now. Then Daniel says, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the what? In the latter days, or the last days. Now the king says, okay, what is it? The king waits impatiently for Daniel to continue. And so Daniel launches straight in and he says, as you were lying there, O king, your mind turned to things to what? To come. You were worried about the future. You were worried about things to come. And the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. What's going to happen in the future. Now he comes to the dream itself. He says, you, O king, you were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And then he goes on and he says, as you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image where? On its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. And then he continues and he says, then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And he goes on and he says, and the wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. But that's not the end, king. And the stone that struck the image, it became a great mountain and it filled the whole earth. He said, that's it. That's it. Remember Nebuchadnezzar, as you were going to bed worrying about the future, as you were lying there, you dreamt and you saw this great image. Its head was made of gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet, they were made of iron and clay. And he says, as you were watching this image, the most amazing thing happens. There is a rock cut out without hands, and it flies through space, and it smashes the image. Where? On its feet. On its feet. That's the dream, O king. Ladies and gentlemen, in just 150 words, this dream outlines the main course of history from Babylon's day around 600 BC right down to the climax of history. It stretches generation after generation, empire after empire, right down to the close of history as we know it. The king says, that's what I saw. You are absolutely right. That's my dream. And if you can tell me my dream, then surely you can tell me the interpretation. What does it all mean? So the king now is anxious to know what it means. Anxious to know what it means. And so Daniel begins to give the interpretation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness something truly amazing. You know, there are times when truth is more amazing than fiction. So, notice what happens. This is the dream. And now we will interpret it to the king. You, king, here's the interpretation. This is what it means. You, king, are that head of gold. Remember that great image that you saw? You are the head. You are that head of gold. Now, as we go through the prophecy, we discover that as the prophecy unfolds, each part of that metal image represents a world empire or nation that follows one after another. And so he says, King Nebuchadnezzar, you and your empire Babylon, you are that head of gold. Can you imagine Nebuchadnezzar puffing his chest out? Oh yeah, I'm the head, pure gold. He loved it. He loved it because he'd invested so much in his empire and so much in his golden city. It was a city filled with gold. Now, any wise statesman would have ended the interpretation there. But the tragedy for Nebuchadnezzar was that his kingdom was not, his empire was not to last forever. Because even though it was a golden empire, even though he built probably the most magnificent city this world has ever seen, it wasn't to last. Because Daniel went on and he said, but after you, can you imagine Nebuchadnezzar? After me? What do you mean? Yes, king, after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. And history tells us the story of how Babylon was overthrown. We use the symbolism and the analogy today. You know, we talk about the writing on the wall. You know, when we say the writing's on the wall, it comes here from ancient Babylon. There in the palace, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson was holding a great feast one evening with all his military leaders and all his soldiers. It was the last night for Babylon, because it was on that very night that the Medes and the Persians overthrew Babylon. And so Medo-Persia was the second great empire to rule. The Medes and the Persians symbolized the chest and the arms of silver. Now, friends, if you go over to London and you make your way to the British Museum, truly a wonderful place. If you go to the British Museum, you will find the Cyrus cylinder. And there on the Cyrus cylinder, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time. There on the Cyrus cylinder, dating back to the 600s BC, there you find the story of how the Medes and the Persians under Cyrus the Great overthrew Babylon. You know how they did it? There was a great river, the Euphrates, that flowed through beautiful Babylon and provided them with all the water they needed. So while the king and his generals and soldiers were celebrating in the palace and having this great feast, the Persians diverted the water away from the Euphrates River. And then they just marched along the dry riverbed, through the river gates, and into the city. And that night, the empire of Babylon came to a sad but violent end. And then it was the Medo-Persians that ruled with a great empire. They built roads, they had a postal system. They were a very, very sophisticated group of people that established this empire. And even today, you can go over to present-day Iran, and you could go to places like Persepolis and see the great treasure capital of the ancient Persians. But even the Persian Empire was not to rule forever, because Daniel went on and he said, "King, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." Now, who overthrew the Persians? It was none other than the Greeks. They were the empire, the army, the power that overthrew the Medo-Persians. And they were led by a genius who went by the name Alexander the Great. And he truly was great. Alexander the Great ruled Greece by the time he was 20. He united the warring tribes of the Greeks under one banner, under one army. And at 20, he ruled Greece. At 24, he was the Pharaoh of Egypt. He'd overthrown the Egyptian empire. At 25, he was Lord of Persia and King of the world. He was probably the greatest military genius this world has ever seen. He was never defeated in battle. Now, friends, let me tell you something quite amazing about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great left Greece and headed down on his way to Persia. And on the way, he passed by Tyre. Now, Tyre was the great capital city of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were great seafarers and traders, and they sailed to the then known world, to the ends of the then known world, and they brought the wealth of that world back into Tyre. The Phoenicians became extremely wealthy, and Tyre was their capital. And as Alexander the Great and his army headed past Tyre, he said, "I'll have that wealth, thank you very much." And so, through an amazing strategy and tactics, his army was able to defeat the people of Tyre that sent a tremor through all the other nations and cities of the region. And after he'd finished with Tyre, he turned his attention to Jerusalem. And his army was marching on Jerusalem. And the Jewish nation knew that there is no way they could stand up militarily against Alexander the Great. They were staring defeat and destruction in the face. So they said, "What are we going to do?" They did something amazing. Instead of sending the army out to meet Alexander the Great, they sent the temple priests out to meet him. But they didn't go empty-handed. And they weren't carrying weapons in their hands. They took with them the ancient scrolls of the book of Daniel, with all its predictions about the future. And as they came up to Alexander the Great, they said, "We come in peace." And there they took out the scroll of the book of Daniel, the prophecies of Daniel. And they showed Alexander the Great how Daniel, hundreds of years earlier, had written that Alexander the Great will defeat the Persians. Alexander the Great was so amazed that here his own army and himself were included in the prophecy, and the prediction was that they would defeat the Persians. Now, the Persians had a much greater army than the Greeks, a bigger army, many, many more men. And so really it was unlikely that the Greeks would be able to defeat the Persians. But with that prediction behind him and that assurance gave him the confidence to go down to Persia and defeat the great Persian army and Darius the Persian king. And so he left Jerusalem and its temple in peace and intact. A wonderful, wonderful experience that Alexander the Great had with the predictions and the prophecies of Daniel that we are looking at this evening. And so the Greek Empire ruled the world. And much of our civilization comes from the Greeks. Our Western culture and civilization, our values, our principles, many of them come from the Greeks. But not even the Greek Empire was to last forever. The Greeks, in turn, were to notice, finally there will be a fourth kingdom strong as iron. The Greek kingdom or empire was overthrown by the Empire of Rome, probably the most powerful empire the world has ever seen. The Iron Empire of Rome was a formidable fighting machine. A formidable fighting machine. And their Caesars ruled the world. The names of their Caesars are household names today. Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, Tiberius, and Nero. Rome's empire spanned half a millennium. Over 500 years, the Romans ruled the then known world. And Rome's empire was the greatest that the world has ever seen. This great empire, it seemed invincible. Who could possibly defeat Rome? And it looked as if Rome would rule for the world forever. She ruled from the far west of Europe right across into Asia, down into Africa and up right into Britain. An invincible empire. An empire that people thought would rule the world forever. Seemed invincible. But listen to what the prophecy says. Whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So he's now talking, you notice, about this new development that is to come out of Rome. He's talking now about the feet of iron and clay. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So now a change comes into play. You notice we've had one empire after another. Bang, bang, bang. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And you would expect a fifth empire. But he says no. There will not be a fifth empire. He's making a prediction. He says it will be divided. It'll be divided. And so he comes now to the feet of iron and clay. And he says the feet of iron and clay represent the divided Roman Empire, which ultimately became divided Europe. And so, friends, instead of another world empire, Rome would be divided, and numerous empires or kingdoms symbolized by the 10 toes. And here's something amazing. That is exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. There was no fifth empire that overthrew the Romans. Instead of another empire, the kingdom was divided. Between 351 and 476 AD, barbaric tribes from the north of Europe invaded the Roman Empire. They sacked Rome, and the empire collapsed. And you know, just as there were 10 toes on that image, so there were 10 tribes or nations that developed out of the Roman Empire. And there you see them. And they became the nations of modern Europe, exactly as predicted. You know, the Alemanni became the Germans, the Burgundians, the Swiss, the Franks, the French, the Lombards, the Italians, the Saxons, the English. You notice the Suevi became the Portuguese, the Visigoths developed into the Spanish nation. And then the Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals disappeared from history. And in another prophecy, Daniel even predicted that. And now he goes on, and his focus is the nations of modern Europe. And friends, this is what makes this prophecy so relevant to you and me today. Listen to what he says. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom, this divided kingdom, the nations of modern Europe, will be partly strong and partly brittle. And you know, friends, if you look at the map of Europe today, just as the prophecy predicted, some nations are strong, strong as iron, and others are weak, weak as clay. And then he goes on and he says, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will... Now notice this carefully, because he's making the most amazing predictions here. Incredible, but true. He says, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere one to another, just as iron does not mix with what? With clay. You see, friends, the prophecy predicted that the nations of modern Europe would mix together and they would try to unite to reform the Roman Empire again. But no matter how hard they try, they would never become fully united again. This prophecy predicted that there would always be separate nations in Europe and that they would never become a single entity in the same way that the United States of America has. They would never become a single empire, a single nation again. You notice? The prophecy predicted that the nations of modern Europe would attempt to unite. They would attempt to unite into an empire in three ways. Firstly, politically by war, by force. They would attempt to unite again. Secondly, economically, by currency and trade. They would attempt to unite. And thirdly, socially, by intermarriage. They would attempt to unite again into one great empire. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me share something with you that is quite amazing. Unbelievable, but true. You know, at the time of World War I, that's the beginning of the last century, relatives of Queen Victoria sat on most of the thrones of Europe. Marriage was used as a tool for empire building. They thought if they could just marry into different families and royal houses, that they would be able to reunite all of Europe again into one single empire. And so World War I, in a sense, was just like a family squabble amongst the royal households of Europe, who were all related or relatives of Queen Victoria. But they weren't the first who tried to unite, mingle by intermarriage. Napoleon tried it. Napoleon divorced Josephine and he married Maria Louisa of Austria in an attempt to do this. He wanted to unite the Napoleonic line with the Habsburg dynasty in an attempt to unite Europe. Because it was Napoleon's dream to unite Europe into one great empire again. Listen to what he said. Napoleon said, there will be one Europe. There will be one currency. There will be one language. There will be one government all over Europe. And you know, he came within a snowflake of making that a reality. But remember, he went over to Russia, and the cold Russian winter and the snowflakes destroyed his dream. The ancient prophecy said, they shall not adhere. They won't stick together. And when he came to Waterloo, where he met his end, he was heard to say, God Almighty is too much for me. You see, friends, down through history, some of the greatest individuals that this world have ever seen, some of the most powerful men to walk this planet, have tried to unite Europe. First, there was Charlemagne. Charlemagne thought that he would be able to unite Europe, powerful military leader. Then came Charles V of Spain, Louis XIV, the great Sun King of France. He tried to unite Europe but failed. And then came our man Napoleon Bonaparte. He tried and failed. And then came Kaiser Wilhelm II. And Kaiser said that where all the others had failed, he would succeed. Charlemagne couldn't do it. Charles V couldn't do it. Louis XIV couldn't do it. Napoleon couldn't do it. But I will. Kaiser Wilhelm II will unite Europe. And you know, one of his acquaintances, his colleagues, came to him and said, listen, Kaiser, I know you've got this dream and this plan to unite Europe, but did you know that Daniel the prophet in an ancient prophecy has predicted that Europe will never be reunited? Do you know that? That's why Charlemagne, Charles V, Louis XIV, they've all failed. Kaiser Wilhelm responded and he said, Daniel's prophecy doesn't fit my plans. I can't accept what he says. I can't accept that. Where Charlemagne and others have failed, I will succeed. I will unite Europe. If you go to eastern France, you find the beautiful city of Metz. And right in the center of Metz, you find one of the most magnificent of all cathedrals. Beautiful cathedral. And surrounding this cathedral are a number of statues. And one of those statues is the statue of Daniel the prophet. And Daniel the prophet is pointing to his prophecy. The people of Metz desperately needed a new roof on their church, a lead roof, which is very expensive, and they couldn't afford it. King Wilhelm II heard that the cathedral needed a new lead roof, and he came to the citizens of Metz and he said, I'll put a new roof on your cathedral. Well, they were so overjoyed and excited that the king, Wilhelm II, was going to fund a new roof on their church. And then he said, there's one condition. Oh, we don't care. Whatever condition. If you're going to put a new roof on, whatever you ask, we will do. He said, remove Daniel's head from that statue and replace it with mine. Because I'm going to prove Daniel wrong. And so that's what they did. They took Daniel's head off and they replaced it with Kaiser's with a big mustache. We all know the outcome of Kaiser's dreams. He plunged the world into World War I, which saw the slaughter of millions of people. Just like all the others, he failed. Because the ancient prophet said, they shall not adhere or stick together. And then along came Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler heard what happened at Metz. He visited Metz and he said to the local people, take Kaiser's head off. Take his head off the statue and put Daniel's back, because Daniel was right and the Kaiser was wrong. But he said, where they all failed, I will succeed. Yes, Charlemagne failed. Charles V failed. Louis XIV failed. Napoleon failed. Kaiser Wilhelm failed, but I will unite Europe. And so with an army of 5 million strong, Hitler promised to do what the Kaiser couldn't. He promised to unite Europe and to build an empire that would last for 1,000 years. The Third Reich, he called it. And in an effort to prove Daniel wrong, he plunged the world into the greatest slaughter in the history of mankind. Do you know that World War II was the largest war ever fought? It was the most destructive war. It was the most widespread war. It was the most violent war. And it was the war that claimed most lives. Friends, World War II was the first global war. Every continent on the face of the earth was involved. 61 countries were involved. 2 billion people were involved, and 62 million people died because Hitler was going to prove Daniel wrong and show that the prophecy was mistaken. But we all know the outcome. His dream ended with a gunshot in a bunker just outside of Berlin. And Hitler joined all the other European powerhouses that had failed in their attempts to unite Europe. They all tried and they all failed because the prophecy said they shall not adhere one to another. And now we come down to our day in modern Europe with an idea that had its seed in the mind of none other than George Washington. You know, George Washington said, one day, on the model of the United States of America, a United States of Europe will come into being. And so they've tried. Francois Mitterrand of France said, a great power is being born. We are going to reunite the empire. We are going to unite economically. And Helmut Kohl, the leader of Germany, said, the course is irreversible. And Romano Prodi said, we can and will succeed in creating a unified, prosperous, democratic Europe where citizens can live in peace and freedom. And so they set about to form a united Europe economically. And then disaster struck. Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Spain virtually collapsed economically. And then Cyprus just went under a couple of weeks ago. You know the story. And just this week, Slovenia is saying, we can't do it either. And so the whole concept is wobbly and beginning to crumble. Why? Because the ancient prophet said, they shall not adhere together. The prophecy was so accurate. The 4 empires, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, and then a divided kingdom into modern Europe. The iron and the clay. Friends, I want you to notice the specifics about this ancient prophecy. Written in less than 150 words, but notice the prediction said, there will be 4 great empires. And only 4. There will not be a 5th world empire. The 4th empire, the Roman Empire, will be divided. It'll be divided. Some of the nations that come from that division in Europe, some will be strong and some will be weak. And they will try to unite into one empire again. They will try by power, by the military might. They will try economically. They will try socially by intermarriage. But the ancient prophet said, Europe will not adhere together. Do you notice how every detail of the prediction of the prophecy has been fulfilled to the letter? To the letter. And now we come down to the part that is of most interest and relevance to us. During the time of modern Europe, look what he says. He goes on and he says, you watched. He's talking to the king now. He says, you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on the feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. And in the days of these kings, the nations of modern Europe, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And he goes on and he says, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand for how long? Forever. And he goes on and he says, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. And my friends, just as every detail of the prophecy has been fulfilled so far, the evidence suggests overwhelmingly that the remainder of the prophecy will be fulfilled just as accurately. Just as accurately. You see, that rock represents Christ's final empire. Notice what it says again. And in the days of these kings, the days of modern Europe, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. What's the next big event on the world stage? Friends, the world's last empire will soon appear. The world's last empire is coming soon. It's going to appear. And the question, of course, is this: what will it be like? The same book gives us the information. What will it be like? Notice what it says. The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ. And He shall reign for how long? Forever and ever. What will it be like? Listen. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things are passed away. Then He who sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things new. Oh, my friends, this world as we know it is soon to give way to a better world. One where there will be no more pain, no more suffering, no more sorrow, no more death. I want to be a citizen of that kingdom, don't you? Daniel went on and he said, the dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. It's certain. My friends, just as everything has been fulfilled in detail so far, so is the last little bit of the prophecy going to be fulfilled accurately in every detail. We started our evening together by asking this question: is there any hope? Ladies and gentlemen, on the basis of this book and the great prophecies that it contains, I want to give you an assurance that yes, there certainly is hope. There is hope. And there is hope, my friends, because there is a higher power who knows and reveals the future. There is a higher power, a God who is in control. There is a higher power, a God who cares for us and wants to give us a better world. An empire that will last forever and ever. There is hope because God cares for us. There is hope because very soon He is going to set up the last empire where there will be no more pain, no more sorrow, and no more death. That's the next major event to take place on the stage of Earth's history. Oh, my friends, I want to encourage you to do everything possible to be sure that you are a citizen in that last empire. And so during our series together, this last empire series, we are going to look at the major prophecies of the Bible. You know, tonight we've looked at how the prophecies deal with the ancient empires. But you know, there's even more information, more prophecies in this book, the Bible, that deal with our time. And tomorrow, at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, we are going to look at the modern day prophecies, or the prophecies that deal with modern days, the days in which you and I live. Friends, if you want to know what the future holds for you and your family, make sure you're here tomorrow, 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, when we're going to present the program, Meltdown of the Empire. And we are going to see how the last empire is not far away. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to be with you this evening. I wish you a safe journey home, a good night's rest, and hopefully I will see you again tomorrow, 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, right here at the same venue. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.